Moinian. I'm a associate fellow here at the Middle East Institute, and we have two brilliant scholars, Alex Batanka, who's the director of Iranian Studies at the Middle East Institute, and Hamid Reza Azizi, who is a visiting fellow at the German Institute for International Security Studies. Time is limited. There's so much going on with Iran, so I'm going to delve right into it. You will just notice that I will alternate the questions as into the military aspect and the civil society regional dynamic aspect. The military foreign policy aspect is mostly answered by Hamid Reza, and everything else is addressed by our director of Iranian Studies, Alex Batanka. Alex, good morning. The first question is for you. Just give us the lay of the land, Alex. What's going on in Iran? Are the demonstrations still ongoing? What's the morale of the people? What's their daily life looking like, their daily challenges? It's yours.
Thank you, Nazir. It's great to be with you and with Hamid Reza, and I look forward to our discussion this morning. Look, in terms of where we are inside of Iran right now, obviously the protests by now have kind of died down. There are no reports that I have seen of people coming back to the streets. This was probably what the regime intended. This is a regime that is panic-stricken. It really genuinely felt the only way it could overcome the challenge of people in the streets in their hundreds of thousands was this mass killing that the world witnessed just a few weeks ago. That doesn't obviously not mean that you're not going to have more protests erupting. That's always going to be a fear for the regime. But for now, they seem to have put the protesters or contained the protests. But I really want to point out that I have, in the 20 some years of covering Iran professionally, haven't seen this regime so fearful about its own future. I mean, the genuine panic. This is their fight for survival, which means they act, as we've seen with the massacre, and say things that we're not necessarily used to. I know we're going to get into what's happening in the region later on, but you're hearing these officials that are connected to the regime, or commentators that come from, the pro-Khamenei side, if you will, making claims that, this fight has to be one where the United States will learn that going after Iran will cost us dearly. It can be like 2020 with the the Iranian response to the U.S. killing of Qasem Soleimani, or what we saw last summer, 2025, with the choreographed attack on the Al Udeid base in Qatar. So the regime is very much kind of the view that for now it's got the protesters, dealt with that situation. It's not apologetic, which is one of the things that is really shocking when you think about the numbers of people this regime killed in the span of a few days. There is no real effort being made to apologize, to reach out to the people, to explain, what they were trying to do in their own twisted minds, I guess. I just very quickly, let me reference what Ali Khamenei, the Supreme Leader, said on Sunday. I'm sure anyone who watched his speech will have come away with the same kind of impressions I did. Number one, the same old tired justification and given reason to why the protesters happened in the first place. Ali Khamenei has been there since 1989 as supreme leader. He dealt with the first set of major protests against his rule in 1991, and I think it was in his hometown of Mashhad. And throughout these decades, the same explanation: foreigners are plotting against him and his Islamist regime. And the same is being told to people of Iran today, this younger generation of Iranians, who, by the way, I should point out, about 70% of whom were born after the revolution of 1979. So all their lives, they've heard, whenever they come out and have grievances to air, what do they hear back from Khamenei? You are essentially either willingly or unwittingly part of a foreign plot. So no, no soul searching on the part of Khamenei. In fact, which I thought was tasteless, he went as far as almost making fun of the people who were killed in these protests. He got a good laugh in that audience that are supporters of his, when he was making the point that, the American president said to you he will come to your aid, and he didn't. He was really, that was really tasteless. And I thought, I haven't heard him speak in those terms Look, I said one other thing, and then I'll stop, Nazi, which stood out to me in terms of looking ahead. The speech, he looked tired. Khamenei looked tired. We've seen him before being tired, but he looked particularly old and tired, which is understandable. He's 86 years old and he has a lot on his plate. But he was also, again, very stubborn in his stance, defending what has just happened. And then he used the word coup d'etat. He was referring to the sort of what happened in Iran could have been something part of a coup d'etat. To me, coup d'etat means someone inside the regime is looking to sideline the supreme leader, if you will, or there's a group of people who are trying to break free from his policies and maybe go in a different direction. What does that mean? Is this a signal for us to wait for purge of sorts within the regime? There have been reports and rumors, which turned out to be false, of people like Hassan Rouhani and Javad Zarif being picked up. Whatever people might think of those individuals, they're not necessarily aligned with the hardliners in Tehran. When I heard that word coup d'etat, and I thought, what is he saying? Is this a signal that now maybe it's time for the regime to consolidate even more and engage in some sort of a purge, which could also explain why he's engaging in these nuclear talks this week in Turkey to give himself some space and time to lessen the pressure from outside to go after the sort of adversaries inside. But let me stop there, Nazir.
Yeah, no, because I don't want you to encroach on the other important questions that I have lined up for you, and the talks of course is one of the questions. But it's true, the paranoid style of the Islamic regime has always been visible. Now we're looking at a paranoid and panicky Islamic Republic, which is not a great combination. Hamid Reza, the next question is for you, and it kind of speaks to the existential threat that the regime is feeling. Is the Islamic Republic ready for a war with the US? What are its military and ideological strengths, and where are the vulnerabilities?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, and thanks to the Middle East Institute for inviting me to this timely panel. It's a pleasure. Um, well, being ready, I think it depends very much on how we define readiness. Especially in such fluid and unpredictable circumstances. What we can say for sure is that the Islamic Republic is not seeking a war with the United States for obvious reasons, because the disparity is quite obvious and they know that this is going to be destructive and would put their existence into question seriously. But it is preparing, as far as I can see, for a contingency because the regime views the current phase as an unfinished confrontation and the continuation, actually, of the 12-day war last June. And to their view, the war has not ended, but it has just shifted from one theater to another one, from military to economic to, I don't know, psychological, and now potentially back to military. So this is important because the Islamic Republic's concept of readiness, I think, means survivability plus retaliation capacity. So these two indicators are the ones we need to look at in order to judge whether the Islamic Republic is ready or not. So again, as I said, they know that they don't have the ability to defeat the United States in conventional terms. So the question would become, can Iran, can the Islamic Republic absorb a first strike, preserve command and control, and impose costs at a level that would make sustained US escalation, let's say, politically and strategically unattractive? And if you look at all the messaging and all the movements on the ground, let's say, on the Iranian side, it all points to this direction of, as I said, survivability and retaliation capacity. And on that, one thing that there seems to be a consensus among the Islamic Republic security elite is that President Trump doesn't want prolonged and messy wars at high costs. So the only thing they have to do is to make sure that it's going to be as unpredictable, as messy, and as expensive in terms of human costs and economic costs as possible. So this
I
seems
mean,
to
Reza, I'm
be.
sorry. I just want to clarify a point. So a victory for the Islamic regime is to survive a kinetic attack. But wouldn't a retaliation by the Islamic regime invite more firepower from isn't that a conundrum for the regime already?
It absolutely is. I'm just trying to reflect on what I can understand as the way of thinking at the moment on the side of the Islamic Republic. And here, the notion of the unfinished war that I just mentioned, that matters a lot. And that also explains why we still see this stubbornness, as Alex mentioned quite accurately, by the Supreme Leader, by other Iranian officials, even now that they seem to have agreed to talk to President Trump even directly. They are still emphasizing that it's going to be limited to the nuclear issue. They are still, showing defiance on other issues because it is already, reached the thresholds of existential, and they know that. There's a reason. Let's put it like that. There's a reason why Khamenei says that the war is going to be regional. And by the way, that was the first time I was hearing this from the person of Khamenei, because in the past it was the military commanders, IRGC commanders, or even Islamic Republic diplomats would refer to this. But this was the first time that he mentioned this. So this is not, and I explained this in an interview the other day. This is not a sign of strength, a strong regime. It's a sign of desperate one. So this desperation can make the regime act suicidal. And by act suicidal, look, what happened domestically, I want to make this connection between domestic and external a bit more clear. What happened domestically, I think that was already suicidal, because we all know that there's no way that the Islamic Republic can sustain for a long period of time, at least in the way that we've known it for the past few decades. But they did this, and by doing that, they wanted to send a signal to both domestic and external audience that if the existence of the regime is threatened, we are ready to go as far as it takes. So that's
I just
somehow
want to stop
explained.
you. Sorry, Hamid Reza. I want to stop you there because I know where you're going to go, and that's one of the questions. So thank you for that very clear explanation. You were saying that, I mean, Alex, this is a question for you. Hamid Reza was just saying that Khamenei has said that if a war starts, it's going to be a regional war. And this is the first time he said that. Is this why there's a pushback from the Gulf Arab states, the UAE, the Saudis? They have not expressed overt or covert support for the American military forces, and they're really pushing for a diplomatic off-ramp. Do they actually, this is a question I'd like to ask. Do they actually prefer the status quo of having an Islamic regime on their borders that they know, rather than something that's unknown that may come down the pipe?
Look, they've learned to live with this Islamic Republic that essentially been a bad actor in its behavior, an ideological, an expansionist entity that didn't respect its neighbors, called them names. For decades, they called the Gulf states and others names. They were stooges of the Americans. They were weak. They were, sheikhs that had no interest other than, having fun in life and so on. So the Gulf states in particular, and I would say by and large, the entire neighborhood, they don't necessarily like the Islamic Republic for its policies, yet they fear collapse of a central government, essentially, of a country of some 90 million people that's right there on their doorsteps, and what would come after. So a lot of bad scenarios could happen in their minds. Now, again, you could take an optimistic view and say, why are you looking at it from that worst case scenario? Why don't you look at it in terms of you have a bad actor regime replaced by something that's secular, democratic, part of the international community? Wouldn't that be wonderful for everyone in the region and the world? That's a great case to make. The trouble is a lot of people in the region don't think the United States, which they look to for that kind of a scenario to happen, has a game plan. So they don't think President Trump is now engaging with the Iranians in Turkey because he suddenly discovered in the last few weeks after the protest a new game plan for his nuclear objectives when it comes to the Islamic Republic. They feel that the Americans have smelled blood, sensed blood. They see an Iran that's weak, and they're talking in the hope of getting a better nuclear deal. Nothing much more than that. I mean, this is I hate to sound cynical, but essentially the protesters in this context, in this perspective, don't matter much. The U.S. core issue of interest is still the nuclear program, maybe the missiles, maybe what Iran does in the region, but not the idea of changing the Islamic Republic. So if that's your takeaway, if that's where you sort of sit in the world, you just right now want to navigate this very dangerous moment in this tit for tat between US and Iran. So you don't think the Americans are going to go in and replace the regime, and yet you do consider the idea of limited military confrontation between the two, and sitting on the doorsteps of Iran, you want to make sure you don't become collateral damage. So they're trying to part themselves out. Again, I think the Gulf states in particular, but we also see Turkey and others, are not necessarily believers in what the Islamic Republic does in its policies towards the United States, certainly, or even for that matter, Israel. But, and this is important, unless you can show them credibly that there is a game plan here, that it's not just going to be Iran turned into Syria or Libya, that you're not going to sort of come in, break it, and then get bored and move on. That's what they fear, because that's what they've seen from the Americans in recent decades.
Yeah, and that's fair. That's what we did in Iraq, it became very messy after that. So that's fair. So let's move to Hamid Reza. Sorry, Alex, I know we're short on time. Hamid Reza, there's been much talk in every scenario that there's a kinetic action in the Gulf about a naval blockade that will hurt the shipping lanes. 50% of China's oil travels through the Gulf. How likely is it that we may have a naval blockade? And the heels of that question, how strong is Iran's naval forces, and should we be worried about that?
Yeah, that's very important one because I mean, not only given the type and sort of scope of the equipment that has been moved to the region by the United States, but also in terms of the Islamic Republic's threat of retaliation, and closing the Strait of Hormuz has always been on the table on their side, the threats of it at least. Let's look at it a little bit more in detail. So a formal blockade, I think, is still unlikely because it would be a high threshold act, because it would effectively mean an act of war, right? Because at least what I have seen has been like a naval blockade, a shorter one or a more sustained one, as opposed to strikes within the Iranian territory as a means of applying pressure. So I think that would be a formal blockade, would be seen and would be seen as an act of war and would be also problematic. So the more plausible scenario, I think, is would be kind of maritime interdiction, not a formal blockade, but like selective interdictions, sanctions enforcement at sea. I don't know, like covert or quasi-covert disruption, things like that. And we've already, I think, seen signs of that, not in the waters close to Iran, like in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, but Malaysia, for example, there was a report on the seizure of a oil tanker, which was believed to be linked to Iran. So this sort of, I mean, if we are thinking of a pressure campaign that would be a bit more sustained and as effective at the same time, that would be the scenario. So in other words, it would be like a de facto constriction of Iran's maritime lifelines. That would be more likely somehow than a formal blockade. So you're asking about the strength of Iran's
naval assets of Iran.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
About the strength of Iran's naval forces. So naval, I mean, they have worked a lot on different aspects of it, like in terms of sea-based missiles, in terms of I don't know, different types of warships, etc. But we still cannot measure it by the so-called blue water parity. You know, it's still seen in asymmetric terms when it comes to especially comparison with the United States. So the Islamic Republic's comparative strength in naval arena is asymmetric maritime warfare, which was there already since the early years after the revolution. But things like fast attack boats, swarming, coastal missiles, drones, minings, like all these kind of things. So for now, I think it's more about, I mean, the way that Iran has seen the naval arena is more about signaling and cost imposition. And again, back to what I explained earlier, when they look at their option and how to signal deterrence and at the same time, you know, guarantee survivability at least for some time, using these asymmetric tools in order to inflict pressure on the United States becomes very important in their mind. And here it is very important to kind of, you know, have in mind the lesson that they seem to have learned from the experience of the Houthis and the US British campaign last year that resulted eventually in a ceasefire.
Right.
Yeah, so when I look at the debates inside Iran in different, you know, government-backed or pro-government circles, I can see that this has been raised. You know, this is raised frequently as an example. So, in one word, whether or not the United States should be worried about that. So, the worry is less about, as I said, the kind of ability to effectively confront and let's say defeat the United States in naval arena. The concern is about the costs first, and of course the miscalculation, because any sort of a sustained campaign by the United States in the naval arena can also raise the chances for miscalculation, and that was also what CENTCOM mentioned in this in the latest warning that resulted eventually in Iran not going as planned with the military drill that it wanted to have in the Strait of Hormuz.
Thank you. That's perfectly explained, Hamid Reza. But if I were to take away one point from this is that the asymmetry of war, having a U.S. with much bigger firepower in blue waters, as you said, will not in any likelihood be that hurtful to the American military assets, but the cost is going to be there. And Iran is hoping that by raising the costs, swift load action, mining, and all of that, like the Houthis, US will abandon the mission and leave. Okay, thank you. Alex, I just want to zoom this out a little bit or in, depending on how you look at it. I want to go to a basic question. We're all students of Iranian foreign policy and also the Islamic ideology. And it has struck me that at the outset of the revolution, no one really cared to read what Khomeini had in mind, the leader of the Islamic Revolution. Why Israel is an enemy? I mean, that's a question that has haunted me. There was never a border between Iran and Israel, and they never had a history of conflict. The Iranians and Israelis, Jews and Iranians have had a 2,700 year history together. And the prayer sites in Arabia were protected by the Arabs. So why is it that Israel is this great little Satan? What's the ideological spin on that? It's a question for you, Alex.
Thank you, Nazi. Before I answer that great question, let me just very quickly add to something what Hamid Reza and you were discussing just earlier in terms of the region and military targets and so on. For whatever it's worth, and this is a point that I think we all made earlier, the regime is panicky is trying to shape the thinkings of not just folks in Washington, but also obviously in the region, with a very simple assumption that countries in the region, the UAEs, the Saudis, the Qataris, others who have spent so much energy cultivating President Trump, signed hundreds of billions of dollars worth of commercial deals, they actually have leverage. And to get them to want to use some of that leverage in this very precarious moment for the Islamic Republic, they're upping the ante, if you will. So for the first time, we were talking about Khamenei, talking about this could be a regional war. Well, he is obviously the top of the pyramid in saying that. Others are saying that more explicitly. I give you one example. On Sadosimo, the Iranian national TV, one of their commentators was saying U.S. interests in the region are not just military. There are hundreds of billions of dollars worth of commercial American interests. I guess he was referring to energy infrastructure, tourism sector, so on. This is the level of fear that they have and trying to get people, whether it's in the United States, the region, to shape their calculations, essentially. Again, if some people are talking about hitting Iran's energy infrastructure, that is probably one of the easiest things the U.S. could do. But the problem could be that in terms of their retaliation, they're not openly saying, well, whatever's in these countries, even though if they're saying they're not involved in the fight, they might become targets because we need to create maximum panic in part of the global economy to maybe get the Americans to back off. Now, in terms of your question on Israel, look, I mean, and as you know, I'm working on this book project at the moment, Iran's Arab Strategy, and the issue of Israel obviously is central. And I trace it back to 1951, essentially, in some ways, when a young 11, 12-year-old Khamenei attends a mosque sermon in his hometown of Mashhad, when Naval Safavi gives a very anti-Israel speech. Naval Safavi, without getting too much into detail, is one of the early Islamists in Iran, people that Khamenei's of this world kind of listened to and were inspired by, who in turn, Safavi was inspired by Arab intellectuals, people like Hassan Banna and then Qutb, Sayyid Qutb and others. So you have this mixture in terms of the origins of this anti-Israeli position. Because you're right, Khomeini and his contemporaries weren't sitting in the seminaries in Qom or Najaf and coming up with anti-Israel dogma. They were very much sort of received this as a finished project, essentially, from Arab Islamists, from Egyptians and others, and from the Soviet bloc of the time. You should not underestimate the role the left, the Soviet Union, the East Germans had in creating this.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a great point.
So it becomes what it becomes in 1979, very much a product of the Cold War and Islamism of the Arab world. And then for the 1980s, as we know, the Israelis and the Iranians actually found a way to coexist. In fact, Israel was a pivotal player in supplying Iran with weapons. But then after that, after the Cold War ends, they have been on this autopilot, essentially, this tit for tat. But to your point, there is no national security interest on the part of Iran to have this fight with Israel. This is purely ideological. If they dropped it tomorrow, nobody in Iran is going to really, their life's not going to change. And in fact, the Shah of Iran, if I could just say this very quickly, he had a much more balanced position in Israel. He worked with Israelis when it served Iranian interest, and he wouldn't necessarily work with Israelis when he didn't feel it served Iranian interest. The Islamic Republic, and Khamenei in particular, has this sort of inner stubborn position on Israel, and I suspect he's not going to give that up till he actually leaves this world, and that is troubling.
Actually, to your point, Alex, anecdotally, the Shah of Iran and the Israeli engineers, agricultural engineers, had such a good relationship that in the 1960s, 62, 63, he invited Israeli engineers to come and settle in Qazvin, and Hebrew became the second most spoken language in schools and shops. There were so many Israelis living in Iran that the shopkeepers needed to learn Hebrew. So the relationship was intact and pragmatic, as to your point. So, Hamid Reza, this is a question in 3 parts, and I'm hoping for a rather short answer. If U.S. attacks Iran, will that A, invite China and Russia into the theater of war? 2, invite the protesters back to the street? 3, create a panic for the regime elite to defect? We heard today already that I think the ambassador of Sweden is asking for asylum in Switzerland, and he's already defected. Could an attack motivate defection?
Starting with the first part, Russia and China, I don't think that they're gonna intervene in any meaningful way to help the Islamic Republic. And I think to a great extent, this is the understanding on the side of the Islamic Republic itself as well. Because if you just look at the positions of both Moscow and Beijing, um, I mean, especially in the early days of the, more particularly saying it in the first 2 days of the 12-day war, they didn't even condemn the attacks. And then again, I was listening to different debates between experts inside the country, and then the impression was somehow that they did so, and they started sort of offering mediation and also assistance to the Islamic Republic when they made sure that the Islamic Republic is not going to collapse. So there's different reasons for that, and you know, in each case, there's a certain set of factors that comes to play in the calculations of both Russia and China. But for one, I think, and one of the things that we discussed, the type of regional policy that the Islamic Republic has been pursuing over the past few decades, basically since its establishment, this is not quite in line with the priorities of Russia or China. I mean, economic interests, security interests, and the balancing elements in the foreign policy of both countries is quite evident. Um, After the war, we've seen movements, of course, in terms of sort of assisting the Islamic Republic to rehabilitate, to reestablish part of its, for example, missile program. There were reports of China providing some material, then also Russia. But I think there's a limit. So, in one word, if I want to say, it's that if they see the Islamic Republic on the brink of collapse, I don't think that there's going to be any room for meaningful intervention by these two actors. On the second part, I think it was about the protests, right?
Yeah,
Whether
will a kinetic attack invite the protesters back to the street, and will it encourage defection?
That's very important because I think and I believe that the regime was very well prepared for the massacre that it did in the days of January 8th and 9th, because the impression was that, and again, this was the main line of the debate in the aftermath of the 12-day war, that first, Israel attacked Iran, hoping that an attack would incentivize people to come to the streets and bring down the regime. That didn't happen. So next time they would wait until people are already on the streets, and then they would attack in order to, you know, kind of, you know, get the job done. And
that
that's the
hasn't
fear of
happened.
that hasn't happened.
Right.
So the thing is but you know, in their mind, I think that justifies, not justify, I mean, in the moral sense, I mean, that explains, better to say, the excessive use of force and the massacre in order to kind of, you know, how to say, disincentivize people and empty the streets before an attack would come. And I think to some extent they were successful temporarily at achieving that, right? Because from President Trump's announcement that help is coming, now we are in a situation that you know, everything seems to have, you know, come down to the question of nuclear
Sporadic
program.
demonstrations. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So in that sense, and
And
just very
defections,
quickly, I know
Hamid Reza,
on
will
the
you see,
defections,
do you expect to see more defections or any defections from the elites?
I think
Or you
it's
think that's
still
a
very,
homogeneous, very coalesced around the supreme leader group?
I think as long as Supreme Leader is there, it's very difficult to see defections in a massive sense or at the levels that would mean something like a coup in a standard sense, or some fundamental change, for the simple reason that, you know, these guys um, basically see their destinies as so connected to each other and they also don't see any way out.
Yeah.
So this has been one of the because look, to be realistic, I would expect after the massacre that at least at the lower ranks we would see some defections, but that didn't happen.
That hasn't
So it
happened yet.
means
That's
that they
right.
have been, to some extent at least, successful in indoctrination, to the sense that those who are there on the street suppressing people, killing people, are ideologically convinced that this is the right thing to do.
Right. And it's also probably the question of whether we hang together or hang apart. So they're backing each other up. Thank you for that. And that kind of, segues into our next question about the likelihood of a coup. So I think you kind of answered yours. I'm going to ask this from Alex. Alex, quickly, because we're running out of time. What is the likelihood of a coup by the IRGC? And if you can make that brief, tell us, who do you think as a successor, who do you see as a successor to the ailing Ayatollah, who's almost 87, and he's the longest running autocrat in the world, and ridden with cancer? Who is a viable candidate to replace him? And do you see an IRGC coup happening? Quickly.
I'll be quick. I'll put
Yeah.
them two together in one, Nazi. Look, I don't see much of a point in an IRGC coup, not while Khamenei is alive. IRGC is pretty much running the show. I mean, I'm not of the view that the great strategist is Khamenei. He is in certain ways, and when it comes to sort of the worldview or his Islamic civilization, his position on certain issues related to religion and so on. But when it comes to what Iran is doing in the region, the nuclear issue, and so forth, the missiles program, IRGC has been running the show for a long time. And in fact, he's been consolidating power pretty much since the protest movement in '99, when Khamenei feared what he calls a color revolution and gave the IRGC pretty much a blank check and said, do what you need to do to keep me and this regime in power. So there is no real need for IRGC to engage in a coup. They can just tell the old man what to do in many ways, and I think they'll get their way. Khamenei is not in a position to pick up a fight with the one force he has invested so much in to protect him for decades. But one thing I say, Nazi, is this issue, and kind of relates to what you were talking about, succession. IRGC could essentially make a decision as an entity, and this is important because there are divisions within the IRGC. This is not a group of people that have consensus on policy all the time. There are divisions within the IRGC. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that they decide after Khamenei dies, which could be any moment, or it could be around another 10 years, like his father lived almost to the age of 100. IRGC could say the supreme leadership as a position functions no longer in a way that serves our interest, that we need to change it. So you weaken it, you have a council of leaders instead of a single individual being at the top. But the point is, IRGC still will remain the state within the state. That has been the case for it for so long. So I don't buy into the coup argument. I don't see how that will serve IRGC in any way other than sort of take the blame for everything. Then right now they're protecting a theocracy that is said to be blessed by a divine power. If you don't have that justification anymore, then you're answerable for everything, and they already have to answer for so much of the behavior, including being blamed to be engaged in not only repression but also corruption and so forth. So anyway, let me stop there. I could give you a list of names of people.
I know we can go on every question,
Yeah.
but it also reminds me of what Gary Kasparov, the great chess champion, has said about Iran. It says every country has its own mafia, and Iran is the only mafia that has its own country, and that's the IRGC. Hamid Reza, I find your writings so much about the language of nuclear deterrence, which I really appreciated when I was in graduate school. And I'm wondering if you can speak to the language of ambiguity that's coming out both from Tehran and Washington. Let's talk about the American side. President Trump has moved billions of dollars of assets to the Gulf, but also says, the Armada has to float somewhere. If it has to float somewhere, it might as well float near Iran. I don't know if you've heard that, but I find that interesting. It's non-committal, but meanwhile, all the actions are in place. And then there is mixed signaling coming from Ali Larijani, Akbar Velayati, all these, and senior IRGC officers that is kind of contradictory and vague. Is there a merit? Is there a purpose to keeping everything very confusing?
I think, I mean, speaking of ambiguity, especially in this case, because it's, of course, much broader than just on the nuclear issue. And even on the nuclear, as you know, they somehow, tried a little bit to see how far they can go with nuclear ambiguity, but it never translated into full policy of opacity, as you can see in the case of Israel, for example. And this specific case, I think, although ambiguity is not inherent or doesn't inherently mean incoherence, but in crisis environment like the one that we are seeing right now, it can, point to some sort of, how to say, fractures, or better to say, or signs of stress, at the same time as some attempts at using it as a deliberate instrument. Using this as a deliberate instrument has a history, of course, in the Islamic Republic, especially on the nuclear issue, and in the previous episodes of kind of conflicts with either with Israel or with the United States. And on almost all those cases, we saw a domestic division of labor, if you will. Different institutions basically speaking to different audiences, right? So like the IRGC, together with Khamenei himself, signaling resolve, and then the foreign ministry signaling diplomatic openness, and the other institutions, other parts of the organs of the government also, depending on the context, coming in different phases. And in the previous cases, I think it was mostly meant to buy time first, and also increase leverage. At least since President Trump's return to the White House, this hasn't been successful. But in this particular environment, I think it is more a reflection of a political system regime under stress than deliberate ambiguity. Why I'm saying this? Because, first of all, different power centers within the system seem to be not perfectly synchronized. And because, for an effective and successful ambiguity, you need also some level of synchronization and also some level of coordination. But contradictory messages are coming almost at the same time. And sometimes it's not just contradictory. Some of them are basically meant to deny the intention expressed by the other institute, like the foreign ministry literally denying that the Islamic Republic has any intention to go preemptively, against the United States or Israel. So this is the first thing. And then basically, there's also no, as far as I can see, there's also no consensus among the Islamic Republic decision makers on the thresholds. So again, there has to be some level of clarity on the thresholds for at least rhetorical escalation in order to be able to effectively use the language of ambiguity. That also doesn't exist. So under these conditions, I think it's more about the stress and the pressure that the system is feeling, in line with that idea of kind of frustration, not frustration, sorry, the kind of pressure that was also reflected in Khamenei's words somehow.
Right. So my follow-up question, small, would that be, is the ambiguity a matter of policy or panic? I think I get a sense from you that it's more of a matter of panic because the consensus is not there. They're under crisis mode and the communication can have different thresholds. Am I right?
I think so, because especially because in this context, President Trump's own deliberate ambiguity has somehow overtaken
It's a reaction to President Trump's ambiguity. I understand. Alex, there's so many questions ahead of us, and we have only about 12, 13 more minutes. Maybe we just come out with the latest news of the planned talks in Ankara between Turkey, Qatar, Egypt, Oman, maybe UAE, definitely Saudi Arabia, maybe Pakistan, and obviously Iran, Araghchi, and Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner from the US. How are we, Alex? We are the one that withdrew from the 2015 JCPOA in 2018 when President Trump called it the worst deal ever. And here we are back at the table after two assassinations attempts on the president's life. How are we back where we started with Iran? And what do you see as the best outcome for Americans and Iranians on the streets?
Well, that's a tough one, Nazi. Look, I mean, again, without wanting to sound cynical, end of the day, the main issue for the U.S. has been the nature of the Iranian nuclear program. I would say if the US was engaged in nation building projects, promotion of democracy, that kind of ended with the performance of the United States in Iraq. So for a long time, not just this president, but his predecessors or when he was in office first term, the issue hasn't really moved beyond what the US cares about, which is the nuclear program, and linked to that Iran's position on Israel, and linked to that Iran's ability to reach Israel with the arsenal of missiles it has. But if you wanted to solve all this, I don't want to echo the Turkish foreign minister, but I guess one way to do this, well, one most important thing here is optics do matter. And this is really a problem. And I've been saying this for a very long time. President Trump likes a quick win, and he wants to come out and say, the other guy just told me I was right, he was wrong, and I win. That's not going to work with Islamic Republic. Khamenei will not come out and say he was wrong, that he's dragged the country through this mud for 22 years only to give up something he could have given up as early as 2003. So optics matter. So instead of saying they give up the right to enrich uranium, if you really want a diplomatic deal, then you give him a way out. It has to be language like indefinite suspension. And at this point, the Iranians are hard pressed to say no. So optics matter. I don't know if the president and his team are sensitive to that, but Khamenei's going around saying he's God's man on the planet. So you got to give him a way out so he doesn't, humiliation is a factor here. And again, I don't know if the White House takes that into account, or maybe they do and they want that. They want to make an example out of the Islamic Republic and say to any other country around the world, this is what happens to you if you stand up to the United States, even after when you tried almost for half a century. So I think there is a deal here to be made if that's what they want. I suspect that's what the Trump team wants. I am not hearing or seeing evidence of a major project aimed at transforming Iran into what Iran should be, a secular kind of a republic and a partner of the United States. I don't see efforts on that front, intellectually or material wise. So what I'm seeing is more of a Iran is weak, let's get a better deal, and then the president can call it a victory and move on to the next file. That's, I think, what President Trump wants. On the missiles, by the way, very quick, on the regional front, I would say the Iranians are probably more open to give up concessions on their so-called proxies today than any other time before. The proxies have not turned out to do anything for them. Yes, we're hearing the proxies are going to close the Bab el-Mandeb or are going to attack U.S. bases in Iraq, so on, but these are all sort of hypotheticals. When they needed them, including Hezbollah during the war, the 12-day war, it was not a factor. It was not a factor. So the Iranians, again, optics matter. Don't say we pull out of the region. Don't ask them to do that, but make sure they are not providing weapons and money. That matters more to Israel, the United States. And finally, the missiles. The missiles are the only thing they got left in terms of the capacity. And I see that to be very hard one. So again, it comes down to maximalist American position. If you want them to give it all up, I doubt they're going to do that. Then I think they would rather risk another war. With an American president, they think will have appetite for a limited war, but they can survive that as opposed to capitulating, which could be the beginning of a regime that's already on its way out.
Right. And that's well said. Thank you, Alex, for that. I'm glad you brought up the missiles because that's actually the segue to my question to Hamid Reza. Hamid Reza, there is a lot of unhappiness about the 12-day war being only 12 days. A lot of people say that they should have just gone in while the assets were there and destabilize the regime enough so that it will fall under the weight of its own incoherence and weakness. And I was thinking about that when I was watching the series Tehran. I don't know if you guys are a fan, but I'm a huge fan. And there's a scene where the senior cleric in the intelligence department tells Farzad, who's his operator, who says, one of the strengths of this regime is that it can renew itself. And I'm wondering if by not finishing the 12-day war in a conclusive manner, we gave the regime enough time to rebuild its missiles. I understand that the launchers are not there, but the missiles are back up, the numbers are back up, and actually allow them to figure out a way to be more destructive, more aggressive in their foreign policy orientation, in the crackdown on their citizens, what you call the logic of massacre. Hamid Reza, can you tell us about, looking back, would you have advised the American president to continue the 12-day war?
Look, I disagree with the notion of the Islamic Republic being more destructive now than it was before the 12-day war. Simply because if you just look at the level of destruction, both in material terms and also in terms of human resources, what they have lost and who they have lost, there's a significant change. So, of course, there have been attempts at rebuilding the missile program, but as far as I can understand, neither for Israel nor for the United States, destroying the missile program was never really on the table, simply because it is not possible through only air campaign. One of the very significant tenets of Iran's missile program is redundancy, and also the fact that these missile silos and launchers and everything is kind of dispersed throughout the country. And within the IRGC's Mosaic doctrine, and which was also somehow adapted through the years, and especially after the 12-day war, now we can see that more clearly. Even if there's a real decapitation at the center, the provincial commanders have the authority to still, to continue shooting. So the choice was not just between continuing the war for another few days and then getting the job done, or abandoning it where it was. It was a choice between a prolonged campaign that would also require kind of ground forces to be there in order to penetrate deep into the missile silos, or to end it as they did. And also, we shouldn't forget about the human costs and also material costs, more importantly, of those same missiles for Israel. The air defense did very well, but toward the final days of the conflict, we saw that there was a shortage of the THAAD missiles.
Yeah, exactly.
So even if you want to resume it at some point, you need to make sure that it's gonna be able to defend for a longer period than just 12 days. So it was all practicalities of the thing and logistics of it, rather than, and of course, before that, the political will. So it wasn't on the table, I think.
It was on time to finish it when the president did. So I'm gonna combine the next two questions together, and I think we'll finish on time. And to the audience, thank you for being here. I have tried to incorporate your questions as best as I could into the questions that I already had. If there's anything outstanding, I will encourage MEI to do this again, Iran on the Brink 2.0 in a few weeks, so we can answer all your questions. So, Alex, there is an article in Free Press by Eli Lake today that talks about the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi as a reluctant leader. I don't find him reluctant anymore. If that was the case before, that's no longer the case. I want to get your opinion on that. And the follow-up to that question, that's how I'm combining the questions, is that it's a multiple choice question. will the president attack an order on Iran? Multiple choice, yes, no, maybe. And if you say maybe, it's not going to be taken against you. Alex?
Thank you. So, yeah, thank you. We have 5 minutes or so, so I'll be very quick. Look, I think, Reza Pahlavi, Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi is, unmatched in terms of name recognition. He has a lot of supporters in the diaspora, and we heard with our own ears a lot of supporters, particularly among the young in Iran. So, in terms of inspirational leader, nobody can match him. But when it comes to organization, and I haven't read the article you're citing before, but there's a lot of work to be done there. The organization in the Reza Pahlavi kind of circle needs to do a lot more, in my view, to bring this vast diaspora in the opposition in diaspora together. For the life of me, when I look at the nature of the Islamic Republic, I don't understand the petty differences and the petty fighting that goes on among the various members of the opposition. I think I would say Reza Pahlavi needs to do what he used to do much more of a few years ago, which is to sort of put himself front as the transition leader that takes the Iran from Islamic Republic to something else, and then people of Iran, when they have the opportunity, can choose what role Reza Pahlavi can play. Right now, the image that certainly his opponents are depicting of him is we're going to replace the Islamist system in Iran with another kind of absolute monarchy type of thing. I don't buy into that argument, but
Neither do I, yeah. That's right. That's exactly right.
Charge, and he has to fight that far more effectively than he has done. But look, this is very important, because if you come to a point where there is no nuclear agreement, Iran's going to be what it is, then you will maybe see Americans and certainly the Western countries looking for a credible opposition. And that's where the likes of Reza Pahlavi have to do a much more better job in making themselves credible as government in waiting, if you will, outside, that can take over and prevent what a lot of people fear: chaos and anarchy and civil war, God forbid, in Iran. In terms of the second part, very quickly, look, forgive me for saying maybe.
It's yes, no, maybe, Alex.
It's the maybe. The president has surprised the Iranians twice already,
right.
2020 and 2025. So those people in Iran who think, yeah, he doesn't like war, we can carry on, they might be surprised again.
Great. That's well said. Thank you. Hamid said the same question, the chances of Crown Prince. He's the only one that is the front runner, and he has declared his readiness to go back to Iran and lead the country into representative government. And will the president attack an order on Iran? Yes, no, maybe.
What I can say as a foreign policy expert is that, exactly like what Alex said in terms of organization, I think on foreign policy front, there's also a lot to do in order to enhance the chances. One thing, you mentioned Russia and China, for example. Look, counting on the support of the United States and emphasizing the coordination and partnership and giving the promises of a day after in Iran, where when Iran is going to be a partner with Israel and the United States, that's for granted. A campaign can be successful if you can also have the partners of the Islamic Republic on board. And you can also kind of, reassure the regional countries. Like, just look at the position of Turkey, look at the position of the GCC countries. So they are not convinced that the day after is going to be a stable, strong Iran. So these are the things that needs to be done much, much harder on the foreign policy front, I would say. And quickly on your question,
Yes,
I would also go with maybe. If I had a fixed view, I would be betting on poly markets, but I don't.
A lot of people are, by the way.
Yeah.
No, that maybe is good enough for us. Listen, we have a president that operates on maybe, and that's the best answer that we could give at this point. Thank you. It's 11:59. It's great talking to you guys. You were clear, knowledgeable. It was enlightening to hear from you, and thank you for our audience. Thank you for staying with us for the whole hour. I hope you liked what you heard, and come back and join us for the next webinars.